Manager here at DU's University College. I support students as they explore and engage in our college's graduate degree programs. If anyone here tonight is interested in chatting about program offerings or knows of someone who is, please have them reach out to me. My email's in the chat, and I'd be happy to visit with them. This evening's conversation will be recorded. I want to make sure and mention that. I will be monitoring the chat this evening along with my colleague and the engine behind tonight's discussion, Dr. Brian Cicero. I just wanted to take a brief moment to sincerely thank Brian. He's a great friend and colleague, and above that, he is an amazing advocate for the college and specifically our students. Our conversation tonight will be moderated by the Academic Program Director for the Communication Management Program, Cindy Cragg. Following a 20-year career in marketing communication with a focus on marketing analytics and digital campaign optimization, Cindy joined the University of Denver's University College in 2019 as Academic Director for the Communication Management Program. In her role as Academic Director, Cindy brings a passion for aligning a robust graduate curriculum with both long-standing and emerging industry needs to ensure students graduate with skills needed to see their professional goals come to fruition. As a lifelong learner herself, Cindy's work and teaching is guided by the ethos, learn it today, apply it tomorrow. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Director Cragg.
Good evening. Thanks, David. So appreciate the warm welcome, and I am really excited for the panel discussion that we're going to have this evening, and thrilled to introduce you to our panelists. We have Dr. Dean Gualco, who has served in many high-profile public-private sector positions as human resource and library director. He has a doctorate from the University of the Pacific, an MBA and an MPA from the University of Southern California. He's published 9 books, the latest one titled Take the Right Road, Finding the Right Job, Being the Right Employee, and Becoming the Right Person. He has appeared in over 150 national media forums, including TV, radio, magazines, and we welcome him to this panel. Our second panelist is Dr. Jack Buffington. Jack is my counterpart here, one of my counterparts, I should say, here at University College at the University of Denver. He serves as the program director for the supply chain program here at the University of Denver, and he's also a professor in the program. And he is also the director of supply chain and sustainability at First Key Consulting, the world's leading beer industry consulting firm. His latest book, Reinventing Supply Chain, a 21st Century Covenant to America, is going to be available not as soon as he was hoping, I was just hearing about, but still very soon. So thank you for joining us, Jack. And last but not least, we have Dr. Mindy Weinstein. She is the founder and CEO of MindShift. She's a national speaker, a trainer, and a digital marketing strategist. Mindy has been named one of the top women in SEO and has presented at conferences like Digital Summit, PubCon, SMX, and SEJ Summit, and many more. She is the host of Persuasion in Business, a podcast that dives into persuasion-related concepts and provides a real-world application for businesses. Mindy has a PhD in general psychology with an emphasis in technology. She is an adjunct here in the program that I manage, the Communication Management Program, as well as an adjunct at a couple other institutions. Mindy recently authored what I think is now a best-selling book, Power of Scarcity, Leveraging Urgency to Influence Customer Decisions. And it was the release of that book that prompted the idea for the conversation that we're going to have tonight. So I am interested in looking at this topic of scarcity from the perspective of how consumers can be better informed of how scarcity affects decisions and their decision-making process. So I'd be interested to hear from each of your different perspectives. How do you think people can navigate the differences between real and perceived scarcity in different as it impacts different areas of their life? Mindy, would you like to jump in and start?
I was already nodding my head.
I
Like,
saw.
I have some
Let's go.
thoughts. I have some thoughts on this subject.
Yeah.
So really interesting, just to like set the stage a little bit. I wrote this book on scarcity. I take it from a psychological perspective because general psychology was my degree. And I realized as I was going through my studies that out of all the different influence factors that we know that drive consumer behavior, scarcity tends to be the strongest one because it's actually a primal reaction that we have. So we've seen it through brain scans that when people are exposed to scarcity, and I'm not talking about scarcity like they're thought that they're going to be withheld water or food, but talking about like an online auction simulation, or instead of an online simulation, it could be even just a sale. And so in those situations, MRI scans have actually shown that the area of the brain that deals with valuation lights up. And so does the area of the brain that deals with decision making. So fast decisions are made. So understanding that framework is really important here. And so trying to understand the difference between what is real and what's artificial scarcity, I would say also really the question is, how do you know if the decision you're making is only because something is scarce? And I feel like that's what you have to ask yourself more than anything else. Are you purchasing something because you're experiencing a fear of missing out? Are you purchasing something because it's hard to get and that's driving you, as I just mentioned? So you're viewing something that's scarce as being valuable. And so there are different ways, as even a consumer that you can overcome that. And a lot of that is just pausing to make your decisions and also doing your due diligence. Is this the sale that happens all the time? Is this really the last item? Well, we have a lot of information at our fingertips. And so you can definitely empower yourself, but you have to understand a bit about how powerful it is.
Really interesting. Dean, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I wrote a book called Building Your Own Business, Building a Business and Then Make It on Your Own Generation. Scarcity for me comes with jobs. People think it's a great job market. It's a great job market unless you're looking for a good job. Then it's incredibly difficult. After World War II, the United States made 40% of the world's goods and services, 40%. We made 75% of all the cars in the world. That was, of course, because many of the countries in the world were decimated after the world, except for the United States. Can you imagine the job market in the United States if we still produced 40% of all the goods and services in the world? It would be amazing, but unfortunately, it's not. We're looking at what I call the fall of the human employee. Back in the 1920s, the average large firm was in business for 67 years. Now it's less than 15 years. That's large firms. For the average firm, they're in business about 10 years. The average person is in a job 4 years. It's not because they found another job or a better job. It's often because the job they have is no longer there. So when you have organizations that are around fewer years, employees who are in a job fewer years, you can see the scarcity, as we're talking about, within the job market, but also, as Mindy was saying, you have the psychological aspect. So much of what we talk about here with decision making is about knowing the background. Unfortunately, we don't know enough about the background. I concentrate on the job market. For instance, by 2030, we're expecting 38% of all jobs are going to be automated. That means, in fact, gone. In fact, during that same time period, about 35% of all workers are going to have to get another job. And what kind of job are they going to get? Think about this. 88% of jobs that are eliminated today are because we don't need a human. 88%. And there's a couple of really interesting statistics. By the way, this is important. It shows the scarcity, but most importantly, when you go out to look for a job, this type of information is critical to make the right decision. For instance, GM now makes more cars than they did in the 1970s with 600,000 fewer workers. US factories make 85% more than 1987 with 65% fewer workers. Steel's up 18% since the 1990s, and they have almost half the workers that they had. Some of you may have seen McDonald's is testing a restaurant with absolutely 0 employees. And without going too much into robots, every robot takes 6 human jobs, every one. And robots by 2027 are going to create 15 million jobs, not for humans, for robots. Can you imagine? That's 10% of our workforce is going to be robots. So knowing that, understanding the scarcity, understanding those decision-making processes help us as we go into the job market make better decisions.
So Jack, you're probably thinking that everybody just needs to get into the beer industry.
I think after that, we all need to have a beer, right? Well, actually, my thoughts on scarcity is the term is much different since we've implemented supply chains. So if you think across history, so supply chains are simply, the balancing of supply and demand, right? So for most of human history, there was always more demand than supply. So economic growth, population growth couldn't happen because there just wasn't enough of everything, right? And supply chains have only been around for like 80 years, driven, as Corey would tell you, she's in my class, driven by fossil fuels, right? So the amount of production that's possible today, if you look at, starting in after World War II, economic growth and population growth just exploded, right? So the challenge we have with scarcity before supply chains is not the same problem we have today. So when we talk about, we're running out of stuff, in a lot of cases, it's due to the inefficiency of our supply chains. But let me give you a few examples of the difference of scarcity back then versus the scarcity today. So we talk about there being food shortages in certain places in the world, and yet the supply chain produces enough food for 150% of the world's population. So it's not like we don't have enough of things, we just have a supply chain issue. Another example is aluminum. So before the industrial time, aluminum was the rarest of all materials. So here's a little story. Napoleon, when he had guests at his castle or whatever it was, he'd serve his guests on aluminum plates because aluminum was more rare than gold and silver. And yet today, you have an aluminum can, it's not even worth 5 cents, you throw it away. I could go on. We could talk about water. People talk about water scarcity. It's not a scarcity per se. It's a challenge that we have with our supply chains. And so some of the challenges we've seen since COVID is a breakdown of our supply chain system. So it's not necessarily, how we define scarcity in the past. In fact, I think from an environmental standpoint, we need to look at how we use products, from an opposite standpoint of having too much versus scarcity. So I just think it's important, to identify from a supply demand standpoint that how we define scarcity today is different than how we defined it before, the industrial revolutions.
Yeah, Mindy, I see you nodding again. My guess is you have something to interject right here.
No, I mean,
Especially from a psychological standpoint.
Right,
Jack's definitely speaking their language here.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, hearing both of you talk, we all have different perspectives of how we come in, but like you said, we're not like we were before, and there is supply chain, yet we still fear potential loss. Think about toilet paper. I mean, I feel like that's all I have to say. I mean, that's really what even got me to write the book, because I had already been studying scarcity, and then toilet paper ran out during COVID. And I remember looking at my husband going, I'm watching all of this research I've done play out, because what happens too, I already mentioned a couple of things with brain scans, but we fear loss. And so there is, but FOMO is the buzzword, but even though there is enough water, there's enough supplies, eggs right now, I know that's an issue, but because we have a fear of loss, it propels us to make those decisions. Also, a lot of times, because we have that fear of loss, we start to hyper focus on what is scarce. Even if it's something, I want to step it back, even if it's not something essential to our survival, if it's the latest Nike drop, we're still going to look at that and we're going to want it and we're going to feel like we're going to miss out. And that's a restriction that was intentional, that was made. That's not even a supply chain issue. And so it just really speaks to what we're talking about. It's the psychology. It's what's driving us to do these things and make these decisions.
Hey, Cindy, can I jump in on the toilet paper point?
Yeah, I anticipated that I've been in a meeting before, Jack, when you dumped in a toilet paper. Go for it.
Yeah, because like I was all excited when I'm here at DU and finally people wanted to talk about supply chain, and all the TV channels, all they wanted to talk about is toilet paper. So all my friends made fun of me and called me Dr. Toilet Paper. So actually what happens, a really interesting story, is that toilet paper is not toilet paper. You're like, what the heck is he talking about? So the toilet paper you have at home is 3-ply virgin paper versus the single-ply recycled paper. And so when we all went home, there was toilet. By the way, if this ever happens again, go on Amazon and buy commercial toilet paper. And it's the same thing when it comes to steaks. You know, a steak you buy at a supermarket is different than the steak you get at a restaurant. It's the same with beer. You drink out of a keg when you're at a restaurant versus drinking in a can and a bottle. So it's interesting how, to Mindy's point, people thought we were running out of stuff from a psychological standpoint, and we have plenty of it.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's the last time I ever talk about toilet paper.
Yeah, I'm not going to make any predictions on that for sure. We do have a question in the chat that came up, and so I thought I'd just weave this right in. Jared's asking, what will you say to the thought that the jobs that have been lost is more of a relocation of where the jobs are done, factor of globalization versus automation, especially in the US? So Dean, it sounds like maybe this is pointed in your direction.
That's the hope. I would say for Jared, that's the hope. The reality hasn't shown out. For instance, if you look back in the 1700s, over 90% of the US was in farming. Now the percentage, I think, is less than 1. Then you go into the 1800s and the 1900s, we went into manufacturing, then we went into services, and technology has dominated. But the next greatest employment sector has not appeared. And it used to, at some time a couple of years ago, they thought it would be the green revolution. Those jobs are not materializing. And so it is a real crisis about it. When you look at the job market in the future, that industry that is going to promote and employ millions, 113 million in the United States, has just not shown itself. So it is not the issue of the relocation or the globalization. These jobs, as I mentioned earlier, are just going to be gone. In fact, think about it this way: 90%, 9 out of every 10 jobs created today are contract or contingent jobs. Contract or contingent. The number of people working in a contract or contingent job is now 40%. It was only 30% in 2005. That's how much it's increasing. So those jobs are going away, and there are no new jobs coming up as we speak here today. I haven't seen anyone who can say this is the market or the industry that's going to employ millions of people. It's not coming. Hopefully it does, but it's going to be quite troubling. And I'll say this too. When people say, I have so many statistics, when people say, I want to get a job, how can I keep a job? There's really only 2 things that you can do to keep a job. You either work for a customer or you change something. If you don't work for a customer and if you don't change anything, it's going to be impossible for you to get and keep a job. In fact, if you're at a job now where you don't work for a customer and you don't change anything, you're going to lose your job. And some people, I have this saying that says, not only nothing lasts, but I also say the inevitable inevitably happens. So for the people that I go out and talk to, and I do these seminars and they say, I'm worried about my job, I say, you should be. And the second thing I say is, what are you doing to get another job? Well, nothing. And a wing and a prayer is not a strategy. Coming to things like this and talking to people who understand the industry is a strategy. People now have to talk and have some actions related to positioning themselves to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming in the next couple of years. And if you don't, then we can't help you. School can't help you. Your parents can't help you. This is a time where you have to understand where the market's going and position yourself somewhere within that market to profit from it, because you can.
And I think that it's interesting especially listening to you, Dean, I mean, it reminds me of a lot of the headlines, certainly that we have seen through the pandemic, whether it's talking about products or services or jobs, or it's that kind of alarmist, that trying to foster that scarcity mindset, and then trying to help people navigate overreacting. I mean, you're talking about being strategic, right? And looking to the future and trying to make some strategic decisions as to not just emotionally react and do something rash. And I'm wondering, Mindy, what are your thoughts on managing that reaction to this mindset that not to say, I mean, there is some reality around, needing to build up certain skill sets, needing to make these strategic decisions. But I think there's also a need to manage within yourself the way that you're approaching and thinking about what's the best path for you, and where you need to have that fight or flight alarms going off. I need to manage this, and where you can take your time in figuring out the best course of action.
Well, I think it's partly what you just said at the very end. It's taking your time. I feel like that a lot with that scarcity mindset, whether it's purchases or it's a fear that's paralyzing you because you're concerned about your job or your future. It's taking the time to understand why are you feeling that way? What is driving that? And then from there, how can you rectify the situation? So purchases are one thing. I could talk about that later, but then thinking about opportunities. Well, that's what I love with the things that Dean said is, think about your skills and be strategic, because then all of a sudden now you are empowering yourself and you're getting a bit more control there too. And so I think that's a big thing, and that's going to still help keep you going.
Yeah, and so along those lines, another question from the chat, for a person who has grown up in a society operating under scarcity, how do you rewire your brain to see abundance versus scarcity? I think that's a great question.
I think so. And I'm going to approach it from consumer behavior side. So that's how I'm going to approach this, because that's really what my studies have been.
Sure.
Because we've all been there. And I will tell you, different conversations I've had with people, sometimes they're like, well, I don't fall for scarcity marketing messages like nearly sold out or one seat left. I just know that's not, something that's real. But when you start to think about it, we all at some point have succumb to something. So whether it's you waited for a long time for that brand new restaurant that just opened up because you wanted to go, so you waited on that list, that's popularity. That's demand related scarcity. Going to the grocery store and you intended to buy one bag of coffee, that's your favorite, and you show up, it's on sale, and there's a sign that says limit 3. Well, your brain is actually going to look at that and just buy 3. But you only went for 1. I mean, even that is showing a restriction. So when I look at it from a psychological lens, scarcity is any type of restriction. So how do you overcome that? So it doesn't mean that, even though I talked about those brain scans and how your brain automatically does certain things, and we are hardwired that way. And a lot of that comes from, our early ancestors and the scarcity that they faced. It doesn't mean that we're zombies as consumers and we're just going to go about and just buy things blindly. It's really, really understanding what scarcity does to you. And so that's things like making quick mental shortcuts, hyper-focusing on something, fearing that you're going to miss out. So understanding that is the first thing. So understanding that that's what's happening. Then really, anytime before you make a purchase, take 24 hours or longer. Don't do anything. Just make sure that this is something you really want. And when you start to retrain your brain that way, that gets you out of that cycle of just constantly falling for scarcity. Because we've also seen through psychological research that even if we fear we're going to miss out on this limited edition item or whatever it might be, that feeling that we have is short-lived. And so the anticipated regret that we think we're going to have, we might have it for a little bit, but it's going to go away. So to me, knowing that and then practicing, because everything's practice in life, and you're going to be able to have your eyes opened a bit more to what's going around you and what's driving your decisions when it comes to purchases. And so that really, because I know the question also had to do with abundance, but that helps you even just kind of think about, well, what do I have and do I need this? And so it gets you out of that cycle.
And I would add a couple things. I feel like I'm in the dark, the darkness goes down when I come on because of some of the statistics. It would be nice if we can move from mind-numbing jobs, but almost 50% of jobs pay less than $20 an hour, 50%. In fact, if I was to ask people what percent of workers today live paycheck to paycheck, just think about a statistic in your mind before I answer. What percentage of people from 1 to 100 of all the people in the United States live paycheck to paycheck? It's 80%. In fact, 30% of people who have a full-time job have a second job. So it would be nice if we didn't have these mind-numbing jobs. The problem is the jobs we have now are not providing us with the standard of living on average that we need. And so it makes it more difficult to move to areas because our job determines, for the most part, our standard of living. 30% of people who retire now have no savings. So our job determines the way in which we're going to live. So it's hard to say that let's have less reliance on our jobs when most of us, according to the statistics, are not doing as well as we had hoped. Scarcity, right?
Yeah, to add to it, first off, I want to say that my daughters need to read Mindy's book. So they stop buying so much stuff. But when we talk about global supply chain, what's interesting is we really have an imbalance between production and consumption of, we still have about 800 million manufacturer workers around the world who are willing to work for $1 or $2 an hour. So when Dean mentions that 80% of the US population is living paycheck to paycheck, these are still people making 15, 20, even $20 an hour, but even $50,000 a year, $80,000 a year. So from a production standpoint, these are very difficult situations to, quote unquote, bring jobs back to the United States, because I think some of the answers to what, Mindy and Dean have been talking about from a jobs and a psychology standpoint is a balance between, people buying things and people spending money. So, Dean mentioned after World War II, when the United States was producing a lot of things, there were jobs where you could work in manufacturing and make a lot of money. So I worked at Coors, I ran logistics, and we still have employees that make a lot of money working hourly jobs. That's few and far between the United States. So people who used to work in factories and make a good living now work at the Amazon warehouse because, it's just too easy to produce things in countries where it's $1 an hour. So I think some of these problems have to do with an imbalance between supply and demand. And our economy is built on consumption. So to Mindy's point, consumer products. I work for a consumer product company, right? And we try to light everybody's brain up to buy more stuff. Our economy is built on consumption, right? So there's a balance in supply and demand across the planet, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's a balance in any single economy. And I think that gets into what Dean's talking about from a employment standpoint.
Well, and Jack, you just hit on something that I was hesitant to ask, but now I'm just going to go there. To what extent does the scarcity mindset and what corporations know the scarcity mindset is going to bring about in people, to what extent does that get leveraged and used?
Well, from our standpoint, I work for a fast-moving consumer company, and you have to be the first to market in order to get this sort of loyalty of like having people buy things. But we would often produce things for the sake of trying to drive demand through production. And I think that's also a part of what's happening here is that production is so efficient and it's so, scalable, that then we get into what Mindy's talking about is like our team would focus on just getting things out to market as efficiently and cheap as possible. And then we had another team trying to convince people to buy things. So, in a financial market, you can't blame our company because we have to meet, goals in order for our stock to do well. So it's just a very difficult model you got to continue to grow. And so you have to have that growth mindset of inducing more demand.
So
Mindy,
I'll,
what do you think?
You want to
Yeah.
jump in there?
okay, so no, I'm going to be totally controversial, I think, now for what
Do
I'm
it.
going to say. So just to put this out there. So I totally agree with what Jack is saying. So it's not that where I'm going to have a little controversy, is that from a marketing and business perspective, now we're going to talk about from that point of view, scarcity is not like this evil thing. And I think sometimes we feel that way because we feel manipulated as consumers. And that is really what I've been talking about, but I'm telling you that so you can empower yourself too. So when I was doing research on scarcity, even before the book, I mean, that's even what my dissertation was on. I understood, more of the academic side, the psychological research, the impact. But when I actually got to the point where I was working on this book, I was interviewing different executives. So I interviewed the former, he was the VP of global marketing for McDonald's. He had been at the company for 40 years. Like, how does McDonald's use scarcity? I interviewed the founder of 1-800-Flowers, and they own Harry and David. How do they use scarcity? And then a lot of other companies. And I want to tell you something. And so this is what I think to me is just so fascinating, is that, I already talked about the different things that happen with scarcity, but there was unintended consequences in a good way, I should say, that I discovered when I was talking to these executives. For example, McDonald's, when they released the McRib, which came out recently and had its 5th farewell tour, by the way. So if you were very concerned and you have FOMO because you missed having your 10th McRib, probably don't worry because they've had the farewell tour before. So you're going to be okay. But they do different things like bring that product in, take it out. So they have their Shamrock Shake. Those things are actually still fall under scarcity. So McRib, that's a limited time offer. So there's time related scarcity attached to it. Their Shamrock Shake, there is a time related scarcity to that, a restriction of time. And so with McDonald's, when I was talking to him, he said, we do this to create excitement. And you do see that, like you think about the McRib, and there's forums of people who talk about the McRib. There's apps that have McRib trackers. My husband's obsessed with them. So every McDonald's we drive by, he's like, what if there was McRibs there? What if? And so I want to talk about that. So there is some like excitement. You can have fun with it without, manipulating people. You're making excitement. 1-800-Flowers, one of the things that they do, which is still really invoking that scarcity feeling, is you go on their website and it's overwhelming how many floral arrangements you can choose from. So they know, like, come closer to Valentine's Day, there's going to be a lot of people on there buying that, let's help and inform customers. Let's notate which ones are most popular and which ones, are the best sellers. Because then you even take a mental shortcut as a consumer, which that's not necessarily a bad thing. You're already there to buy flowers. Now they've used scarcity to show, which is demand related scarcity, that popularity of like, hey, this is one people choose. And so I don't think it's always bad, because there's ways that businesses can leverage that. And, as long as it's a good product, a good service, and to me, there's a difference between manipulation and persuasion, but as long as we're more on the persuasion side, where we're not trying to get people to do things that would harm them, you can really leverage scarcity, and it's all just the way you word things and release products.
And if I can add, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because scarcity is a great thing. I want to be the person whose skill or knowledge is scarce, because frankly, I'm going to make a ton of money. I'm going to write a book that no one else has written, because then I'm going to give speeches that people are going to pay a lot of money to be. So much of what I talk about, probably the others as well, is we want to understand the market, understand the background, understand where there are potentials. And then you want to position yourself in the middle of that potential. And you actually want nobody else to be just like you, because you have now dominated the scarcity market. And so for me, scarcity is about understanding the future and then doing something to go there. I don't want to create something that somebody else has done, because that's not scarce, and there's no market for that. But there is market for something that's new and fresh. In fact, I remember watching The Voice, and they, every time there's a new singer come out, they look for somebody who doesn't sound like anybody else. What are they looking for? Scarcity. Be scarce, and that's where your future is. So as again, to kind of go back, when we talk about all the pitfalls of where the economy is, now you understand that. Don't go in that area, go over here in this area that doesn't exist.
There's another question in the chat. Starting with COVID and now war in Ukraine, the world seems to have started down a path toward more fractionalized and regional. I have something on top of. I can't get rid of it. Economics. What kind of impacts do you foresee this having on overall progress in real versus artificial scarcity of goods and services?
Well, a couple things. One thing I want to mention regarding scarcity and the war. Not many people know this, but when it comes to food staples, Russia and Ukraine are responsible for a pretty significant amount of food. And rich countries like China have started to hoard basic commodities like corn and wheat. Significant. Part of the problem that they're having is problems within climate change of growing your own crops, which is an interesting dynamic of geopolitics. Of course, the poor countries always lose out on that. But one thing regarding that, I think what you're talking about is a global supply chain is starting to become more geopolitical as a country like China starts to build its own infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative to try to connect its own supply chain, so to speak. And so you're starting to see those things happen, but in reality, a lot of supply chain flows through private enterprise, through supply and demand. But you are starting to see, the fractioning of supply chains. We're starting to call it friend sourcing. So we try to move, our supply chains out of places like China and into places more like Vietnam and India. But of course, efficiencies always win. So it's a really interesting dynamic when it's the interplay of economics, efficiency, and geopolitics to see what's happening. And just one point to mention, which both Mindy and Dita mentioned relative to students, is when it comes to problem solving, right? So being a person who works for a company to try to figure all this stuff out, using it as a unique skill to solve problems. I got to tell you, there's so many jobs out there right now in my space because they're seeing all these dynamics happen. So, as Corey would tell you in our program, we focus on structured problem solving of trying to figure these things out. And, there's one, speaking of scarcity, one thing that companies are scarce of is problem solving. They have a lot of people who can go to meetings and, fill out reports and stuff like that. I have chief supply chain officers I know, they're like, hey, I have VPs who can't problem solve. Yeah. So there's definitely a scarcity of that you can leverage as a unique skill.
That's exactly what I was thinking when I talk to, prospective employers or industry people. What I hear that there's a scarcity of is critical thinking. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, problem solving. And I'm hearing critical thinking and what Mindy is talking about when she talks about from a consumer perspective, when Dean's talking about jobs and strategically positioning yourself for the right job in the future, that's also critical thinking. And so it's something employers are looking for. It's something that is a deficit, at a deficit with so many folks. And I can say it's something that on the higher ed side, in curriculum building and the administrative side of making sure that students are leaving their graduate programs with really the skills that they need to be most effective in their industry. Top of that list is critical thinking. And so, yeah, really, really important. And I'm seeing some head nods amongst the three of you. So I'm going to pause just for a second. And I also saw that another question I think came through. So yeah, feel free to comment on that, any of you.
I have a really short comment, but it was between what you just said and what Jack said, is that, I mentioned that the brain, when faced with scarcity, the valuation process is what lights up that part of the brain, which the same thing's happening if you're trying to hire someone and you just can't find the skill set. I mean, what happens in that situation is it becomes an equation. Scarcity equals value. So having that, and Dean, when you talked about that too, of when you have a skill that's scarce, you are more valuable. And I think now I'm just I maybe have a little more to say, because that's a huge thing. But I think even knowing that yourself, like, I have this skill, I have honed in on this is what I know. And you know that you have that value, it comes across when you're trying to get your jobs, or it even comes across if you're trying to get a date. Let's just throw that out there. If you value yourself, you know what you're worth. And so I think that's really important. And so everything we're talking about, having those problem solving skills and the critical thinking, I mean, it is going to give you a nice advantage out there.
Great. Yeah, I can't agree more. And so I've been carrying on a little side chat to get some clarification and dig a little deeper into a question that was posed earlier. And so I want to bring us back around to this idea of automation that we had talked about earlier, and the brain numbing jobs and everything. And I'm just going to read part of what is here in the question in the chat. Humans have so much creative and positive potential beyond taking orders at McDonald's, for example. And the question is really around, if we embraced automation as allowing humans to shift their focus to more productive ends, that would be good for society. I think we can all agree to that. And so looking at it through that lens, we could change our mindset really in how society could benefit from the increased human labor for more beneficial means, essentially. So just some clarification on that piece. And Dean, I don't know if you have follow-up comments to that.
Sounds good, but I'm trying to think of it as actionable. What is there a job somewhere in there? I'm not sure that there is. I don't know what would be an increased human benefit other than that which has a job that benefits society. So I'm not sure how to really answer that question, other than I think that the ability to do work worth doing is, and Mindy probably knows more about it from a psychological viewpoint, but if you have a job that you like, that gives you great passion and purpose, there's few things in life that are more beneficial to that. The book that I wrote, which kind of ended with building a business in the make it on your own generation, what I would say is you're going to have to make it on your own. And for those who don't appreciate, in my opinion, that fact today, it's going to be, I'll even say, quite destructive in the future. I think the ability, when you look at some years ago, 80% of companies paid for retirement. Now it's less than 20%. When you look at how long people are at jobs, I can talk about healthcare, all of the benefits that employees used to get, which are slowly, even quickly going away. We're now having to do more and more to create our own type of future. And the more that we realize that, and I'll tell you kind of a quick story where this comes from. Lee Iacocca, who used to run Chrysler, his parents, in his book, he said his parents put him through education, went to Lehigh, and they gave him a great sense of morals and ethics. And they said, now go do something with it. And he never forgot that lesson. And what they meant by that now is, you've got all this potential, do something with it. I think too much, if I could be a bit critical, is that people get the right educations and experience, but they don't do anything with it. What have you done with it? There's another great saying that says, fail fast, fix it, and move on. I sometimes wish that people would fail quicker, learn from it, fix it, and move on, because I think we're not in an era where you go straight up anymore. I think it's like stairs. You kind of go like this, but along the way, you're going to have to stumble, but you have to pick yourself up and you have to keep moving up. The trend is always going up. So for me, in the world of writing books, in the world of teaching a class, some classes are, Mindy could say, or Jack, we've given presentations that just don't work, but we don't stop. We regroup and we do the next one. And I think that in the workplace, that's what we need to do. We need to start building a business. And I can go into small businesses and the 30 million small businesses we have. 80% of small businesses are out of a home. And I tell people, say, well, I can't build a business. 80% of all small businesses are out of a home. And there's 30 million small businesses. You can figure out that calculation. So you can do it. You're going to have to take ownership of your future yourself. You're going to have to pay for your own healthcare, your own retirement. And if you understand that now and start building the skills to allow you to do that in the future, you're not going to be a victim of what the future seems to want to bring us, in my opinion.
Well, let me just tell you.
I didn't want to interrupt, but somebody mentioned about critical thinking, which is a great question, because we say critical thinking a lot, but we really don't kind of define it. Critical thinking is being able to assess a situation, to use your background, which includes your education and your experience, and then to make an intelligent, informed decision that may have some risk, but it has calculated risk. And from there, you make a decision, you have to do something with it. That's what we mean by critical thinking. Critical thinking is important because a computer can't critically think at this point. That is the difference between a human and not a human. That is that advantage that we have that's going to keep us employed, that ability to use that mind rationally and reasonably to come up with a conclusion based on our experiences that we should use in the future. So that's what I mean by that. If I
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. All right, well, kudos to the three of you for generating a lot of questions. At this point, a number of them have come in. And let's see, I'm gonna skip to one that's a follow-up for Jack about problems of supply chain and scarcity, and what are your thoughts on artificial constraints on scarcity, and why, and what we do to create them. And then then we'll get back. There's questions about politics. There's questions about AI. So yeah, but let's start there because it's in response.
I'm reading Cindy and like we need to be quick on our answers. So
well, we're getting down to the end, but it's been a great conversation, and I'm excited for the questions.
The problem with our supply chains is a lack of human intelligence. It's a breakdown of human systems. So that artificial intelligence is based on human knowledge, right? I mean, we can get into this. I'm not going to get into a long distance, but like I think artificial intelligence is an enabler of human systems, and you're not going to be able to utilize it if you have poor, we don't fix how our supply chains operate.
All right. Excellent. Thanks for following up with that. Let's see. Let's go to some of these. We've got a couple questions about AI. Latest breakthroughs in AI. How does this fit into problem solving and thinking? Dean, I think that might have been along the lines of what you just addressed. Do you think organizations will turn to AI in the near future? I think organizations are. AI is there. Any comments from you all on the AI front?
Yeah, and I would say that it's driven by politics too. The increase in the minimum wage, this is not a political statement, but the increase in the minimum wage has prompted more AI and robots in the workplace. We are seeing many more kiosks just in the last couple of years because of the increase in the minimum wage. Another thing I was mentioning to somebody the other day, there's an expectation by 2030, 25% of all combat in the United States is going to be by robots. And people say, that's never going to happen. I go, well, there was a movie 20 years ago in Star Wars that talked about that. And I go, what about the planes that fly themselves? And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess that is going to happen. It's 25%. By the way, that's tens of thousands of jobs that are going to be gone because we don't need somebody to put boots on the ground. And right now, I was telling somebody the other day, since 2020, there's been over 2 million surgeries by robo doctors. What do you mean, robot? 2 million. And we're looking at 25% of manufacturing jobs are going to be robots. So absolutely, and Jack brought this up, as a company looks at making more money, one way they can do it is not having people. By the way, it's not just the hourly wage, but you don't have to pay for vacation, sick leave. You don't have to train. They don't sue, and they like everybody. Robots like everybody. You don't have to worry about conflict, HR, or anything like that. They're a dream in a way to employ. They really are. And so you can see how if you own a business, you would want to turn to that. I mean, it's not a happy thing to say, but if you own a business, you would.
Let's talk about politicians and political entities using scarcity in their communications. Mindy, did you touch on that at all when you were doing your research?
You know what? And I'll talk about that a little bit. So no, not as much, but I can just tell you just based on the different types of scarcity. And again, remember, I'm talking from the psychological perspective. Really, politicians, that's where you see the time-related scarcity. So giving you some type of feeling that there's only so much time to make a decision. And then there's a bit of that fear. If you don't do this, you don't take action, you don't vote this way, this is what can happen. And so it does come in there. And, it's one of those things that you as a voter or just a resident of your state, your county and whatnot, just understanding that of what's being said. But I wanted to say one other thing just really quickly on that without getting too off topic. But what I actually see the most when it comes to politics is social proof. And I know that we're not talking about social proof today, but that's where you're able to show that other people trust this politician, or that, like in Arizona, right in the middle of the pandemic, when they were trying to get more people vaccinated, there were signs above our freeway that didn't just say get vaccinated. It actually said this number of Arizonans have been vaccinated to date. So it's that social proof. All of a sudden you're like, well, they're doing it, so it must be okay. And so I see that a bit more than I do scarcity, but sometimes time related does come up.
Thank you, Mindy. So we've got 8 minutes left. How about, and there's been more comments that have, comments and questions that have come through chat, which you all might be reading as well as we're going through this. Let's just do a round of parting last words, last thoughts, on this topic, or looking towards the future. I mean, I think we're all curious as to, when you all look in your crystal balls, what do you see? And what do people that are here tonight, listening and participating, what do they need to know about the future?
Well, I can take it first. And so
Sure.
again,
yeah.
I keep coming from the consumer side, but I'm going to switch between my consumer hat and a business hat. So I will say from a consumer hat, hopefully the things I've talked about, that's for you to know and to make wiser decisions, because the idea of using the principle of scarcity in marketing messages is not going away. So talking about AI, machine learning has been a part of so many of our tools in marketing for a while. So that's actually not new. AI is involved, and it helps us look at tons of data and locate those patterns and make decisions, implement scarcity, those type of things. Like Booking.com is a great example of implementing scarcity to cause you to book that hotel room. And so from a consumer aspect, knowing that that's not going away, we're in a digital age, you're seeing things all the time, social media, ads are coming at you, we're very much going to be exposed to it, but just arm yourself, make sure you're making those right decisions. From a business standpoint, I will say that when you think about scarcity, it is something that you can implement. And a lot of times it's just the way you word things. I told you the example of 1-800-Flowers. Something's a bestseller, say it's a bestseller. If you can have a product that's fun, bringing it, in and out during the year, like do that. That is scarcity, but it creates that enjoyment. And sometimes, again, it's just the way you word things. So it doesn't have to be a whole nother marketing avenue you take that costs you a lot of money. Just word things a little bit differently, and you'll see some success with it.
I think one thing that was really good that both Dean and Mindy talked about is scarcity isn't always a bad thing, right? But at least from a standpoint of supply and demand and how it works within a global supply chain, it is. And one thing that I'm advocating in my book and research is community-based systems, which tries to rationalize supply and demand locally because our supply chains are in balance across the planet, but it's spiky globalization. So there's demand here, there's supply there. And through the use of technology like blockchain and 3D printing, we have this amazing opportunity to rationalize our supply chains, which, you know, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, which was decimated by manufacturing leaving the United States. Like, how do we bring, you know, a balance between people as producers and consumers to rationalize communities? I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'm really excited about that. So that's my view of the future.
Going back to critical thinking, which I think is a great term, I think what the three of us have done has given background and perspective to what we believe. The statistics that I'll talk about myself that have shown have hopefully got across to you that I have some understanding of the field of which I'm conversing about. If I was to say jobs are going to go away and there's no markets, you'd say, I don't believe that. Hopefully by portraying to you the statistics, the facts behind my conclusions, it gives some merit, some influence to what I'm saying. So that's the first thing. Second thing, people will always buy something that they want. You just have to figure out what they want. If you have something that they want, they will always buy it, whether it's a book, a speech, or some type of product or some type of service. Lastly, it's a make it on your own generation. If we don't walk out of this presentation realizing that we're going to have to take much more ownership of our future than ever before, than at any generation, up until probably the 1700s, when 90% of the people worked on the farms, we're going back. The history, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. We're going back to now where people are having to take care of so much more of their present and future. We have to start doing that.
Absolutely. Excellent. Final thoughts from the three of you. Let's see, I'm trying to, I would like, so a couple of things. If you all have website information or other information that you would like to share with the folks that are here with us, I would encourage you to put that in chat. I also believe that our plan was to put each of you into a breakout room, and if folks wanted to go to the breakout room to then interact with you a little bit more and ask some of these questions that have come up in the chat that maybe we didn't get a chance to get to, that's an opportunity for that to connect maybe a little bit more on a personal level. Let's see, and I am looking for Brian and David to see how we want to do the breakdown.
So two things, Cindy, thanks so much for mentioning that. Dean, Mindy, and Jack, if you do have any contact information, send it to Cindy. We will include it in the recording, so that will be included there. I am going to put everybody, I'm going to open up some breakout rooms here. Hang on. Options. Recreate.
This is the extra ad lib part of the evening.
Okay, so we have room 1 will be Mindy, room 2 will be Dean, and room 3 will be Jack. And I'm going to open up the rooms, and if you would like to join any of those rooms, again, 1 Mindy, 2 Dean, or 3 Jack.
And maybe we put that in chat as well. Mindy, Dean, Jack, thank you very, very much for the conversation tonight. This was super interesting. I think everybody enjoyed it. And thanks for sharing out in the breakout rooms as well.
Hey, Brian, it's telling me to go to room 2, by the way. I thought, okay, you just fixed it. Never mind.
Okay. Awesome.
I'd love to hear Dean, but.
Oh, you want to go to Dean's room? That's great. Oh, awesome. Thank you all.
I'm going to stop recording right now as well.
Okay.